So what is Donald Trump up to again? Trump questioned Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in turbulent times. These are times of transition, of interregnum, when old structures are falling apart and new structures are being formed. When old alliances are under pressure and under strain, and new alliances may be forming, and this is one of the symptoms. Let's take a look at what Donald Trump actually said and why he said it. Spoiler alert, it's because of Hormuz, just as we expected. But of course, we'll also look at what risks are associated with making these statements, and how we, as Europeans, should approach this. Let's first take a look at what he said. Let's read the quotes. We would always be there for them, but now, given their actions, maybe we don't have to, right? Trump told the audience. That sounds like breaking news. Yes, sir, is it breaking news? I think we've just got breaking news, but it's a fact. I said it. Why support them if they don't support us? They were present, but not truly there for us. It depends on your definition. There are many definitions of Article 5. You know that, right? Simply put, Donald Trump questioned Article 5. And he questioned Article 5 because Europeans are so indecisive about whether they should go to Hormuz or not. Of course, what's happening here is exactly what I expected, what we talked about here, namely that Donald Trump has too big an ego. He's too stubborn a person and can't admit that he made a mistake when he didn't consult his allies before attacking Iran. Of course, he didn't have to consult Spain or allies he thought wouldn't agree with the attack on Iran. But he could have tried with some pro-Israeli states. For example, he could have tried with Britain or Germany. Finland is willing now, Greece, and so on. He could have tried there, but he didn't. However, the problem right now is that he absolutely doesn't see his mistake and isn't able to admit that he made a strategic error. So right now he's blaming everyone else for the mistake. Everyone else is guilty except him. And we have to respond to that somehow. Europe has to respond to that somehow. And saying, Donald Trump is an idiot, NATO works like this and not the way he thinks, that's obviously an option. But the problem is that it's not pragmatic. Of course, we should make decisions pragmatically because we need NATO. Of course, the United States also needs NATO. And now it's necessary to explain to the United States and Donald Trump why NATO is still beneficial, even though Europeans didn't come to Iran's aid. And how do you explain this to Donald Trump, who obviously doesn't understand how NATO works, doesn't understand how Article 5 works? He doesn't understand that NATO is not an offensive organization, that it's a defensive organization. Of course, you can say that NATO attacked, for example, in Serbia and so on. But that wasn't exactly a NATO attack. It was more of a UN attack that used NATO structures. That's a bit different. Of course, some countries that are part of NATO used to attack in the past, sure. But again, that wasn't under the NATO banner. It was countries that were members of NATO. So in this regard, NATO functions primarily as a defensive alliance. And this is something that Donald Trump simply doesn't want to understand. He's not able to understand it, and I don't think that we'll be able to explain to him, that we'll be able to tell him, look, we didn't help you in Iran because NATO is a defensive alliance and not an offensive alliance, because his argument will be, we're attacking Iran to protect Europe from nuclear weapons that Iran might have. So you just can't explain this to him. You'll have to explain it to him in some other way. How can Europeans explain to Trump that they didn't go to Iran, but it's not his fault? But actually, it's not even wrong because it's not really Europe's fault either. We won't be able to do that. Here we need to realize that it's no longer about who's right. It's not about who's right. It's not about how it should be. It's not about whether Donald Trump is an idiot or not. Of course he is. But now we have to deal with it somehow. And the best response would be to simply tell him, yes, Donald, we'll help you in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll help you, we'll send ships there, we'll try to do it, and thanks to that, we'll have influence on ending that war. Because if we have our soldiers, our people, and our ships there, we'll have the opportunity to have a say in how that conflict is resolved. And in return, maybe you can help us in some way in Ukraine, which you abandoned. So let's try to work something out. Yeah, this is something Europeans should do. But the problem is that some European countries include Spain. That's a big problem, that Spain is in Europe. Maybe I'd ban that. I'd just move Spain to Antarctica. But that's the first point. The second point is that there are countries like Germany here which say that it's not their war, which of course it's not their war, but it's not exactly a strategic thing to say. And then there are simply different countries that approach it differently. And that's obviously something that undermines unity in NATO. The problem here is that Donald Trump is an idiot and we in Europe are not. And when an idiot talks to someone who isn't an idiot, of course they can't understand each other. You either have to bring the idiot up to your level, or if the idiot is so powerful and so big, and you need him, then to some extent you have to lower yourself to his level so you don't lose him. So now, as Europeans, we have to become brutally idiotic and be a bit like Donald Trump, so we don't lose the United States. And it seems to me that many of us aren't capable of this, and we'd rather act arrogantly like we're NATO and that's how it works. And it can't be the way the American president says, because that's not how it is, and don't agree with him. And let's be proud and stand our ground. But the problem here is that we're not ready to be proud. We're not prepared for that. We don't have that military strength. We don't have a nuclear umbrella on the level of the United States nuclear umbrella. We have the French and British ones, and that's too few nuclear weapons. Of course, you can say that 100 nuclear weapons are enough, but the problem is that when things are balanced on the scales, when Russia looks at us, they'll see too few nuclear weapons, and overall, that increases the risk of a nuclear conflict or any other conflict between Russia and Europe. That brings us to the point that this questioning of Article 5 by Donald Trump and our inability to actually adapt to the current world increases the risk of conflict. Because we cling to certain rules and to our own mindset, our own pride, instead of behaving pragmatically, and that actually weakens the strength of the alliance. Because when Donald Trump questions it now, he does so based on foolish arguments, but those arguments are obviously enough for him. So he uses those foolish arguments, questions Article 5, and by doing so, he questions the very existence of NATO, which of course causes various reactions in Europe. It creates tension between America and Europe. And at the same time, this tension, this breaking up of NATO, increases the chance, the risk that the Russians might attack, for example, Estonia, that some kind of conflict will occur. Because the deterrence of NATO, won't be as strong as it would be if we acted united, even if we came across like a monkey with a stick, which is what Donald Trump is. At least we would appear united. But the problem is that now we seem divided. That it's basically over, that nothing works here anymore. That the Americans have their own vision of how NATO works, and we have our own vision of how NATO works. So the Americans won't come to help us. And it doesn't matter if you tell yourself they wouldn't come anyway. Maybe not, but the moment people start saying out loud that they won't come to help, that they won't help us, that they have no obligations, that we didn't help them, of course, they're wrong. Of course, Donald Trump is lying and doesn't understand things. Of course, he's an idiot. But we have to stay on good terms with this idiot because he has a big stick. Unfortunately, until we have our own stick, standing at attention and ready to beat the Russians at the border, we still need that idiot with the stick. So we have to start acting like we need that big idiot with the big stick. And what does that mean? It means arming ourselves so that we need him as little as possible and at the same time trying to maintain the transatlantic bond for as long as we need him. Once we don't need him anymore, we'll have much more room to maneuver. Much more. But for now, we need him, no matter how big of an asshole he is. And if we allow ourselves not to need him, meaning if we reject him out of our own pride, then we're just increasing the risk of war, the risk to our own safety. And of course, you might say, Russia could never defeat the European states, And the fact that we only have 300 nukes and not 6,000 nukes, sure, but it's still a whole lot of nukes. They wouldn't risk a nuclear war, even if it meant just minor damage. You have it wrong. The moment you have fewer nukes, so your deterrence is weaker, and on top of that, those nukes are held by the French, who are simply in Western Europe and might not care about Eastern Europe at all, then at that moment, it's not about us winning the war, that there might not even be a nuclear war, that it could just be a conventional war, and maybe we would win that. Do you understand? That's not the point at all. Of course, probably yes, we would probably win a war with Russia if they attacked us. Yeah, okay. But the point is to make sure they never attack us, so they don't even try. The deterrent force should be so strong that the war never actually happens. And without the United States, that deterrent force won't be strong enough to stop Russia from trying to attack the Baltics, or even just testing it, if you know what I mean. Our goal is not to win a war with Russia. Our goal is not to have a war with Russia. That's the problem. And without the United States, there's a greater chance we'll have one because Russia will be less afraid of us. So, Europe's reaction, if it's anything other than, we'll send ships, Donald, shut up, NATO exists, NATO works, we'll meddle in Iran, but we'll send ships because, damn it, we've got balls, we've got a stick too, and we're also apes. Simply, if our reaction is different, if at this moment we can't convince Donald Trump, then, well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. We must either act as Donald Trump wants or persuade him differently. But honestly, if you want me to be the one who starts convincing Donald Trump that NATO makes sense for him because he doesn't understand it, because he doesn't know how it works, because he uses it terribly, because he can't do math, because he doesn't understand economics, he doesn't understand anything at all. He's a completely clueless businessman from Manhattan who, damn, would have lost his own pants without his dad. If I have to explain this to Donald Trump, I'd rather shoot myself. So that's that. It's impossible to explain to him. Obviously, he's an idiot. Obviously, we have to adapt to him and try to be as little dependent as possible on idiots like the Americans. The situation is screwed, ladies and gentlemen. Understand that it's screwed. And we simply have to choose. Either we submit to the idiot or we increase the risk of war with Russia. That's our choice. Make your choice. Make your choice. Submit to the jerk and cooperate with the jerk against all your instincts. That's your choice, or you can forget about the jerk, tell him to get lost, act proud, but lower your own safety. Yeah, that's the choice. And of course, it's all Donald Trump's fault. It's all the Americans' fault. It's all those idiots in the White House. Yes, they're to blame. But reality doesn't care about that. That's the problem. So maybe write in the comments what you think about it. I've been saying this here pretty much from the beginning, and it's actually a fascinating clash between the world as it should be, how the world should look, and how it actually looks. And in the world, unfortunately, in the modern world, force prevails, and peace is guaranteed by nuclear weapons. So that's about it. Write your opinions in the comments. Support my work. Share this video. Subscribe. Join the streams where this video was made. It took 4 tries, but on the 4th try, it worked out. And I'll see you again next time. See ya.